It's all alive again at the National Stadium. Speeds. Was he held? Yes! Penalty! So often in the past, Wales have suffered because of penalties in vital matches.
Gordon's there. Field, surely a handball. Penalty kick. It's a penalty kick for Scotland.
Paul Bowden to take it. Oh, and he's hit the crossbar.
Sensational from Hal Robson-Kanu. Bill! Gareth Bale, NBE.
These home forwards are in fighting trim. John Charles again, passing to Tapscott. He shoots and it's in. Wales have opened the scoring.
Great John Green rush! Yes! 1-0!
And Wales have finished with a bit of a swagger.
Bruce, welcome to episode 197. Hot on the heels of 196. My name's Russell, and it's just thee and thou, Leon. How you keeping?
All right, yeah. Sort of like a bit of a sad occasion, sad sort of podcast to be doing, but I know, we'll kind of look back on some good times as well, and
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's one that we're talking about a major figure in Welsh football here, and someone who deserves a tribute. Yeah.
Oh no, for sure. I mean, I think one of the very first podcasts we ever did over, 12 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, we did the Yorath years, maybe over a couple of episodes, I can't quite remember now. And I think for kind of us as well, the guys involved with this, and certainly I speak for myself, Yorath is he's just indelible in my mind to the national team, and my experience of it, my connection with it, my even kind of consciousness that we had a national team, frankly. I don't really remember. I mean, there is the odd game and the odd glimpse, and even that's probably distorted because of what's available on YouTube and things these days, of Mike England's era. But for me, when I was like fully kind of compos mentis about it and knew that a game was coming up and that kind of thing, and I wasn't from a particularly sort of sporting family that was taking the games when I was very young, he was part and parcel of that. And then, of course, you have that campaign for '94, and just how incredible that was. And then you do that thing where you kind of go back and you read a bit more about the history of things, and like I said, then the internet gives you even more insight into it, and you begin to realise, obviously quite how important a player he was, but more than just a player to that team. And I know that he figures in your Brian Flynn book and things like that. Just an absolute giant. And it's I was really moved when we lost him on I think it was the 7th of January, so very early in the year.
Yeah, I don't know where to start, really. It's just such a I don't know, maybe we should start with childhood, begin at the beginning, to quote Dylan Thomas, but because there's just so much to talk about when it comes to Wales. I mean, interestingly as well, it's as with Brian Flynn, who you just mentioned, he's a guy who's such a huge imprint on Welsh football, despite the fact that he left Wales as a teenager for the north of England, and settled in the north of England, and only spent 15, 16 or so years in Wales. Actually, living in Wales, but it certainly left his mark on his nation. Yeah, him and Brian are similar in that respect. But yeah, to go back to the beginning, so he was 75 when he died. So we're talking born 1949, I think 50.
1950.
So growing up in Cardiff in the 50s and 60s, and he had to kind of fight to play football, because it was very much I know you don't like these kind of rugby versus football discussions, but the fact is that Wales at the time certainly was very heavily weighted towards funneling the best young sportsmen towards playing rugby. It's just how it is. There's sort of no really disputing that. And Yorath, as youngsters who are decent in one sport tend to be, was good at several sports. So he played at school. He played football and rugby, which he loved, and cricket as well. He was picked to play quite young for the Cardiff schools team, which I think clashed with his grammar school's rugby matches, and then he was immediately banned by his teachers from because he said he wanted to play football for Cardiff schools from playing rugby and cricket. He just wasn't allowed to do that. They disapproved of football so much, and somebody, I think it was the headmaster, singled him out at assembly and said, "There's actually a boy at this school who thinks he's going to make a living from playing professional football." And he wrote in his autobiography, well, it's funny now, but at the time it was mortifying. I talk about a guy who was, from a young age, who was, single-minded and stubborn, and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna make it." And it always stuck with him, the kind of treatment he got at school in Cardiff, that when he went on to win his first Wales cap in 1969, they didn't put up a picture of him on a sort of board of fame sort of thing, as they had done with Welsh rugby internationals who'd gone to the same school, such as Billy Raybould, I think, was Raybould, who was head boy a couple of years above Yorath. Went on to play rugby for Wales, and as soon as he did, there was like put his photograph on the wall, and with Yorath they just ignored the fact that he was a kid from the school who is now representing Wales, because it was football and it was looked down upon. So when he really became established and was captain, the school would sort of say, "Oh, would you come back and present prizes?" And he always refused to go back because he remembered the treatment he got as a kid. And that was an early example of his single-mindedness and his sort of stubborn streak, which I think was served him well as a player and into his kind of management as well. There are certain sort of incidents which we'll get onto, but he was never, watching all the old footage. Sorry, I'm sort of talking. I'll stop in a second, but like
no, it's good. You carry on.
Watching the footage, it's clear that he was never like he didn't have the talent of a Leighton James or a Toshak, his Wales teammates, but my God, he showed leadership on the pitch, and he had his positioning was good, and he was fierce. He was absolutely fierce, and you could get away with quite a lot more in those days that you wouldn't be able to get away with now. But that fierceness, that stubborn streak, that served him well as a player for sure.
And you get the impression that if you're a young lad at Leeds and you went there, as you said, young, that, and not just any club maybe, but that club at that time, you weren't going to survive if you didn't have an edge about you, that you could project out, that you had that inner steel and that self-belief. And I think what was good was great in some of the tributes to him, particularly those associated with Leeds, was they touched on the fact that actually it took him a while to kind of break into the first team and to kind of command a regular place, because it was just such a great midfield that they, or such a great team, but a great midfield that they had. But once he was there, then he pretty much kind of locked it down for good. And they were just sort of saying you couldn't do that if you weren't a good player as well. And sometimes that whole kind of thing around that particular Leeds team, that nasty streak that he had, that stubbornness, that toughness that he had, almost kind of overshadows the fact that yes, he could play. I always found it was a little bit of a shame that whenever sort of people talked about him, not recently, just in the last sort of 10, 20, 30 years, oh God, well, what a hard man. We've probably done it ourselves. But people who remember him and watched him said, he could play. But I think above all of that, those leadership skills came through in abundance during the 70s. You get a sense that like pretty much every player in that team would have run through a wall for him. I mean, they just looked up to him, didn't want to let him down. Whether you're listening to people like Joey Jones describing Mickey, I heard in tribute to him on the day and after the funeral and things like that. The absolute respect he commanded from the players. There's not many players, I think, who've had such natural great leadership skills and the stature that comes with it, and almost just naturally had it. Just an absolute giant. There is a great quote, and I endorse this 100% off Ellis James. For me, he's on the Mount Rushmore of Welsh football. He was part of every big moment at Welsh football between the 70s and the 90s, either as captain or manager. And for someone who, alphabetically speaking, in terms of his surname, is last but one on the list of caps, I'll leave you to guess who's last. There's an irony there. There's been better players, there's been better managers, but there's nobody who just epitomises this thing that we love and we adore than him, really. So I was really gutted when we lost him, and then thought, you know what, I'm glad he's found peace, because it seemed to be hard for him to find it for a long time, both while he was still involved in the game. And we know now, don't we, a lot of professional sports people in all sorts of games, how hard they find it when it comes to an end. I can only imagine quite how dark some of his times have been since he kind of finished in the game. And I hope he can find the peace that seemed to evade him for so long. But yeah, no, just an absolute giant, and I'm welling up a little bit now, actually.
Yeah, is it Eric Young?
It is Eric Young. Well done.
One Young play for Wales. Scott Young never won a cap. No. Right.
No, he was called up, but he never won a cap.
There's just so much there. Where do you jump in with, like, the idea that maybe he's found some peace? Because this is a guy who lived for 34 years with a broken heart, who witnessed his 15-year-old son die in front of his eyes in the back garden. It's just, I don't know. It's just unfathomable, that kind of, heartache. And, he fully admitted himself he never got over the death of his son, Daniel, who is a talented footballer himself. He'd just signed with Leeds, who were best team in the country at the time. They just won the league.
Yeah.
Or we're about to. They just won the league. It was that summer. They just won the league a month before. They just won it.
Yeah. When you look at pictures of him, he has a touch of the Gary Speeds about him.
Yeah. It's what I always.
It's partly that kind of early '90s boy band curtain haircut, but dark and good looking lad. And there's So he'd have been 42. It was 1992, wasn't it?
He was he's 42. Yeah. So since then, life, and this is something I'm pretty sure the quote was, "Life has never been the same since that day." Oh God! But I mean, it wasn't the first. It wouldn't be the last sort of tragic sort of incident in his life. But I mean, I think to go back to it a bit more chronologically. Leeds, he was there as a kid in the 60s, Don Revie, playing for Don Revie, that's, a hard school. But the central midfield for Leeds was Billy Bremner and Johnny Giles, so two of their greatest ever players, and they were probably the best team in the country, even though it's an interesting one, because I was listening to a podcast about this, Don Revie's Leeds, not long ago. They're saying that, for a good 7-8 years under Revie, they were probably the best team in England, but they didn't have the trophies to show for it. They won a few trophies, but they didn't have the trophies to show for how good they were, because there were so many games, and players would get hammered with game after game after game after game. And by the time, you got to spring after a hard winter with playing on these horrible muddy pitches with 6 FA Cup replays and all this kind of stuff and possibly European campaigns and all this, the players were just knackered by the end of the season. And so they'd fall away and finish second, virtually every season. And someone would cut like Derby or something would sort of come up and win a league title. In terms of consistently season after season, that Leeds team that he came into in the late 60s and then finally sort of established himself in the early 70s was arguably the best team in England. So I mean that shows he must have been a good player to get into the team, which he did eventually. And then he that first season when he really established himself, even though he'd made his debut years before, was 72-73, when, to sort of almost prove my point, he had 2 cup final runners-up medals that season. The Leeds lost the FA Cup final to Sunderland, and they lost the UEFA the Cup Winners' Cup final to AC Milan. And then the following season, he finally won a trophy when he was played a lot of games for the league championship winning team. And then Alf Ramsey got sacked and Don Revie went to England, and Brian Clough came in for 44 days. Interesting period. There's a lot been written about that, and there's a film, Damn United, with Wales's Michael Sheen, of course, playing Clough. And then I think the next manager was Jimmy Armfield, great Blackpool and Liverpool fullback. And Jimmy Armfield seemed to like Yorath, and Yorath was a key part of the Leeds team, which got to the European Cup final in 75. And he became the first Welshman to play in a European Cup final in that game, which they lost 2-0 to Bayern Munich, but it was very, very controversial, and the referee was very, very dodgy, and lots of decisions went against Leeds, and there are mitigating circumstances with that one for sure. But so he could have ended up with a European Cup winners' medal, been the first Welshman to do it, but it was actually Joey Jones 2 years later with Liverpool. And then I mean, that's kind of one of the first of the sort of tragic incidents, because Yorath, really hard tackle, broke player's leg, one of the opponent's legs in that game, one of the Bayern players. I'm just going to look up who it is. Bjorn Andersen, after 4 minutes, didn't get sent off or anything, didn't even get a yellow card. But Bjorn Andersen had to go off after 4 minutes, and they brought on Sepp Weiss instead. And I'm not sure Bjorn Andersen ever really recovered from that. But he did win the European Cup with Bayern that season. But Yorath was full of regret for that, because it was a bad one, apparently. And it's something that's features quite prominently in his book as well, his regret of what happened there. And then Armfield, I think the season after, sold him to Coventry.
He's in the Wales team by this point, isn't he? He's established himself again. Came in towards the end of Dave Bowen's spell, which was not great. There was a huge run of games where we didn't even score a goal. He makes his debut out in Italy. Gigi Riva scores a hat trick. He's only 19. Tossack is there as well, only 20. And it's funny, in my mind, Yorath is a 70s player, but he's playing alongside Mike England, who'd got into the team early in the 60s, Graham Moore, that had caps, came back into the team after a huge run of injuries. Barry Hole was playing at a young age in the early 60s. It's Gary Sprake got into the team as a teenager in the early 60s as well. So he does span sort of a couple of eras, and of course he's still around then, I guess, into the 80s when it starts to evolve into another one under England. But it takes a while for him to start enjoying any success for Wales, and that kind of coincides with Mike Smith coming in.
Yeah, well, that was interesting when we talked to Dave Smallman a few years ago, wasn't it? Like we were, because he
Yeah.
was there at the sort of end of Bowen. He made his debut and then was in the squad for the first few Mike Smith games, even though he only won 7 caps. But we were like, okay, what was it about Mike Smith coming in that really was the catalyst for Wales to pick up results? And he just said Yorath, Yorath as captain was such a huge influence on that, because Mike England had been captain up until then, but Mike England was sort of on the way out by 74 or so when Mike Smith came in. I think he won a couple of caps under Smith, but it was appointing Yorath as captain, which for Smallman and for other players I've talked to, which was as important as Smith as manager, really, that his influence was so great as a captain. And I think there's sort of maybe the fact that actually Revy was had gone to England by this point was good in that regard, because Revy quite famously didn't really like his players playing internationals, like Gary Sprake. Toshak in one of his books alludes to sort of a player at a fashionable club being paid by his club to stay away from internationals, and he doesn't say who it is, but my guess is it was Sprake probably.
Yeah.
So maybe like Revy going to England and getting out of the way was a big help at that point as well, because then it was like Yorath didn't have any qualms about joining up with Wales. The club versus country stuff wasn't so important, and him being made captain. I think Smith was clever there. He realised that Yorath's main quality probably was leadership, and that if he made him captain, then he would respond, and the other players would respond to him as well. And the upturn in the results. You talked about it there. We talked about it with Dave Smallman. We had 11 home internationals where we didn't score a goal from 1970 to 1974. Insane.
It's mad,
didn't score a goal. And then
it's also unacceptable.
It's completely unacceptable. It's absolutely shocking. Yeah, funnily enough, towards the end of Bowen's time, we did draw 1-1 at Wembley against England in a World Cup qualifier and beat Poland in Cardiff in a fantastic game in that World Cup campaign, which Poland qualified for, and famously having drawn 1-1 against England at Wembley again. That's a tough group, isn't it? Wales, England, Poland, only one goes through. Yeah. After that, the European Championship campaign, obviously, which we've talked about in the past. Yorath as captain, and we win 5 games in a row in the same campaign for still the only time in our history. Yorath was such a big part of that.
Yeah, and then once he got to the captaincy, then he doesn't relinquish it pretty much, other than maybe the odd game he's not. Well, obviously he's not available, but not a goal scorer. He scored only twice for us, but it kind of like takes him 10 years to get those 50 caps if you look at it just on that basis. But once he gets a run from about 73, I think, he barely misses a game. So if he is standing up to as you said, as you pointed out, Revy sort of moved on, so maybe the culture changes a little bit. Then all credit to him as well, because he's not missing many games in that run. And as you said, it's a really, really successful era, comparatively speaking. What was sort of Flynn's regard for him? He must have. There's a joke there, isn't it? He must have looked up to him. I don't mean it in that way.
There's a Yorath quote talking about Flynn where he was like, first time he saw him was Leeds were playing Burnley, and he saw a little guy at the head of the Burnley team and assumed it was a mascot. I didn't realise till we got onto the pitch it was actually Brian Flynn. There was just a sort of with certain people I'd kind of bring up when I was talking to Brian for the book, and there would just be like a smile would sort of come across his face and this little sort of glint in his eye, and like Gareth Bale was one. Lee Trundle, another one, and Yorath was another, because all the players just had so much respect for him. Just a great skipper.
I bet you get. I bet that you've got. I mean, Yorath wouldn't have been the only player to look at Lynn's stature and think, "Oh, man, who's this guy?" amongst kind of opposition teams. But you can imagine for Wales, if somebody from, I don't know, in East Germany or whoever we're playing, Hungary, Austria, puts one in on Brian Yorath, that goes down in the book, and that's being paid back with considerable interest, and not even necessarily in the same game. I reckon he probably had his little black book of retribution for fixtures even years apart. Oh, Hungary again. Yes, I remember that tackle from 4 years ago.
The thing is, we were playing England, Scotland, Northern Ireland every season for the home international. So there was, and they were playing against these guys in the league as well. So there was this, Flynn. He remembers this because we talked about Flynn's goal against Scotland on his full debut. Still one of the greatest Wales goals of all time, and. If you watch it, and Brian brought this up, you can see Terry Yorath barging into the back of one of Scotland's players. I don't know if it was Bruce Rioch. It might well have been, because Bruce Rioch and Brian Flynn had a bit of a running battle. But obviously, Brian remembers the goal well and loves talking about that goal because it's such a fantastic goal. But he was like, I remember Terry barging into the back of one of those players completely deliberately, and sort of like how he would sort of deliberately go in late on players and kind of leave a bit in there. Football was a bit different in the 70s and 80s. Yorath was not a guy who would sort of stand up to kind of like modern scrutiny in terms of a million angles and little clips being shown on YouTube. But there are so many players who you'd say the same of. Graham Souness would be another example
of his time.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously Mike England comes in as manager after Smith. You have this great run. He's still around. He's moving clubs a little bit more frequently now, but he's at Spurs. He's then over at Vancouver. He still wins caps over at Vancouver. There's a great bit in his book where he talks about with the family there over in Vancouver. He speaks incredibly highly of that city and the quality of life and where they were living in the city. I forget the geography of it all. I think they were maybe just outside and kind of high up and overlooking. He said it was like really, really lovely.
They had an amazing house, yeah.
Yeah. And then he has to break the news that it is something like 2 weeks after Christmas. And it's like I had to break the news that we're moving back to Bradford and back to the north of England rain and how heartbroken everybody was. I think Gabby Yorath, there's a quote in it from Gabby. I mean, again, I think she took it the hardest.
I think it's in her book actually. Like the photograph of the house in Vancouver. So it's like you can see why I didn't want to leave. So she might have if. The family wanted to stay. Yeah, they loved it out there, but it was just he didn't want to be forgotten by British football, so he put his foot down, and it's a stubborn streak again, and said, "Look, no, we're moving back. If I stay out here any longer, then I don't really have a career." I mean, he could have gone into coaching in Canada. I'm sure there would have been opportunities for him, but it just wouldn't have been anything like the sort of level of profile that he wanted for himself. And
it was a funny time, the game in America, or North America at that point, because the NASL basically folds in '84, but the death knell is being rung and sounded a lot sooner than that. Phil Woosnam, the Welsh guy who's the commissioner of the NASL for Wales International, he's basically kind of voted out of that role by the owners of the different clubs, and it is spending money that it just does not have, and even accounting for the fact that most of the owners are kind of gazillionaires. What you don't do for these people is lose the money, and the money just wasn't coming in both in terms of gates but also in TV revenue. So it was living beyond its means, and so he probably left at the right time, insofar as he was leaving on his own terms rather than basically being fired because the club has the league has folded and the clubs have all folded. There'd have been no money or roles in North America after that. That said, there are plenty of players who stayed over there and then went into things like the collegiate system. So that's always been a big one in some of the universities of the States and Canada, where soccer was being played. And it was more established in the school system over there by that point. So he could have maybe found a role in, I don't know, some sort of University of British Columbia or something like that. I don't know. There was a guy, Brian Hughes, former Swansea fullback. He went out as part of the very first crop with Woosnam to Atlanta. He found his way to Canada. He had a son over there who played for Canada, and he went into that system. Paul James, the Welsh guy that played for Canada in the '86 World Cup. A little bit later, he found his way into it. I get a sense, though, that collegiate university football that's not his scene, Yorath. I mean, a job is a job is a job as well, don't get me wrong, but that's just not quite. No, that just doesn't push his buttons.
No, it's not Terry Yorath. No, it's all too sort of clean and nice,
sedate. Yeah,
I think sedate. It's sort of like it's all polite. It's not his style. I just can't picture it. I just can't picture him sort of staying in that world. It's just not. It just doesn't sort of compute in my head really. And that in talking about that sort of stubborn streak they had. I mean, maybe we could just go back a little bit and talk about the national anthem.
Oh, of course, yes.
At Wembley in '77. Sort of maybe skip that, but like there was this. Ironically enough, considering we were being managed by an Englishman in Mike Smith, there was this sort of perhaps more like an element of Welsh pride that was really kind of entering the picture with Welsh football at the time. And I think to I'm going to sort of say something positive about rugby as well here for once, but like the fact that Wales was so dominant in the Five Nations as was at the time probably helped in terms of like, well, we're not like the little old Wales anymore, and we deserve some respect on the sporting stage. And we'd nearly beaten England at Wembley in '75, very, very close to David Johnson equalised late on for England for a 2-2 draw.
Roberts letting his way to the attack. Griffiths, a quick reaction, and Griffiths nearly got it in, and he's there this time. Toshak celebrates a real scramble in the goal mouth. And Wales had several chances to put that in as they draw level now. The ball, this second half gone. England 1, Wales 1. Got Toshak available for the back header. That's him. Oh, it's there from Griffiths. The England defence froze. It's 2-1 to Wales. Arthur Griffiths, the little man, whose true international career has started at 33, puts Wales in front. And it is really on the cards now that Wales could win for the first time in 20 years. Toshak, foul, Watson, England so anxious. Little. Chance for the early cross. Johnson! In for 2-2. Johnson's second goal, but the players go across to congratulate the boy who crossed it, Brian Little. And so a Don Revie substitution.
We'd never beaten England at Wembley. And then we get to '77, and there's, it's, I think earlier that year we'd started playing. I think it was only earlier that year that we'd started playing the Welsh national anthem as opposed to the English one. Because previously, if there was a national anthem played, which wasn't always the case, I think, it would have been God Save the Queen, as was, which is bizarre. But anyway, there was a request put out that both anthems be played ahead of the home international at Wembley in '77. And I don't know, do you want to take up the story? I think you know probably better than me, actually, don't you?
So the FA refuse, but somehow word gets to the players, but it's on the coach on the way to the game, and I want to say it's John Mahoney is the one who somehow finds out, and I don't know how that would be. I mean, this is not mobile phone days, whatever, but he brings it to Terry's attention, and Terry's like furious. He thinks this is basically this was all agreed, and now they've rolled back on it. makes representation to one of the FAW once they get to the ground, and just isn't satisfied with the response. So they're in the dressing room at Wembley, and they don't need pumping up because it's England, and as you were saying earlier, they play each other all the time. They're playing against their teammates, their mates, etc. They're best men at weddings, they're godfathers of their kids, and all the rest of it. And so they don't need any more pumping up. But they go out, and it's brilliant because it's on YouTube. You can see this, but it's completely unintentional. You just have to kind of zoom in a little bit. They line up, and God Save the Queen is played, and the England players fall out of line, and they go off, and you can see players stop. So the players are singing it, and you can see on the footage that they're standing in line. And basically Terry said, we are singing the anthem, and nobody is to leave until we have sung it. And as we've alluded to, well, more than alluded to, the players are going to not go against him. I mean, they're just not. I mean, out of respect, fear, whatever, but also this sense that actually we've been disrespected, this is dishonest, this is not what we'd agreed, and there's a point of principle, a very, very deep point of principle. And so you can see them, and apparently the crowd are booing.
You can hear it on the YouTube. You can hear the boos on YouTube.
There's officials down on the touchline thinking, what on earth is this? This is not being agreed, this is not protocol, etc., etc. And of course we go on and we win. That for me is a little bit more than a coincidence. That we finally win at Wembley, and indeed still to this day. And he is absolutely front and centre to this act of defiance. That's what it is. And I'm not aware that it ever happened again. And we just take that for granted now, and it goes viral now, doesn't it? You get all the time now. It's just taken for granted. Well, it's not taken for granted. That would be unfair. It's still a very, very special moment for people, but it is the norm and the routine. And that was something that had to be fought and negotiated for. And as simple, as is often the case with these things, a simple act of defiance makes sure that dial is turned and it never goes back. And that's in large part, maybe in sole part to him. And it goes to show the respect that the players had for him. And I've no doubt that there was nothing on his part asking for permission to do this, or thinking, well, what will happen with the Blazers and the diplomacy and all the rest of it. That wouldn't have occurred to him. Or if it had occurred to him, he wouldn't have cared. He'd have just cracked on because it was the right thing to do. Yeah, that's that word stubborn again.
Yeah, God, we needed a captain like him after the Dave Bowen era, and that was just. Jimmy Murphy suffered with this as well after '58, after the World Cup. That just Wales as an international football team were not taken very seriously, and we're just players weren't released. No. It became this cycle of like apathy. Crowds got lower, and nobody expected Wales to do anything to ever beat England in the home internationals, or even Scotland, or to qualify for tournaments. And what happened in '74, Yorath becoming captain with Smith as manager. It was just that was a real sea change in the sort of attitude towards actually playing for Wales. And I think fans who've come on board or just come of age, say since 2014-15, would sort of take this sort of stuff for granted. But we're old enough to know that it wasn't always the case. But to go back even further, it certainly wasn't the case. In the 60s, Toshak talked about when he came into the team as a player, late 60s. It just wasn't a serious setup at all. And Yorath becoming captain was very much part of Wales becoming a serious setup as an international football team.
Do we have a view on what Toshak thought of him?
Respect, total respect.
Because there's two potentially prickly, combustible characters there, isn't there, in a room, over a glass of wine after a game or something. But two Cardiff boys, I guess, maybe they had that in common.
They would have known each other since they were kids, similar age. Toshak a little bit older, I think.
Only about a year, 18 months maybe.
Yeah, but they would have known each other since their school days. They would have played together in the same Cardiff schoolboys team, I would think.
Yeah, you'd have thought so.
Certainly, they knew each other going back to their Cardiff days. And then Toshak had total respect for him. Just as I think the phrase that Toshak used was he was a player's player. And Toshak was someone he didn't always sort of have a lot of praise for other people other than himself. But with Yorath, I get the feeling it was genuine. Obviously, they had things got weird in 93, 94 between the pair of them. That's a whole of an interesting bit that we should maybe get onto as well in chronological order.
The FAW have to hold hands up to that one as well. He gets the job with Wales originally. I mean, okay, he's coaching at Bradford. We have the Valley Parade fire as well. He's caught up in that. So that's one of these first tragedies that, again, affects him. And I didn't realise that until several years after, actually. I mean, I can just about sort of remember it happening. I remember it on the news on the Saturday, and maybe some of the fallout of that. But not aware that he was involved in it.
Yeah, I listened not long ago to Gabby Logan on Desert Island Discs. Gabby Logan, his daughter, of course, and she was there. The family were there, Bradford, and I'd recommend that. It's very moving, and just how much that would have affected him. I don't think the rest of his family really knew. It just wasn't talked about so much, but he went to so many funerals in the aftermath of that, and I think he just saw some stuff that, you know, once you see, you cannot unsee. That's another thing, you know, he lived with for the last 40 plus years of his life. You know, the stuff that he saw that day when so many people died. Shocking, absolute horrific stuff, unimaginable.
Getting the Welsh job, he's part-time originally because he's combining it with club management.
Yeah.
Obviously, Mike England finishes. We've had a number of, you know, it's been a successful era, but again, there's just been this number of near misses in terms of qualification. Yeah,
well, he's basically fired because we didn't qualify for Euro 88. I mean, it was the fourth near miss in a row. It's absurd that we didn't get over the line in at least one of those four in the 80s under Mike England. And it's like, well, probably the action had come down earlier, but it was just always so close, and it was just, but never getting over the line. So this was end of 87. We'd failed to qualify. And the FAW's number one choice to take over was Brian Clough, who was, of course, still Nottingham Forest manager at the time. There's talk that Clough just used the FAW interest as a lever to get a better contract at Forest. But Clough himself wrote and said that he was very genuinely keen on the job because he knew he was never going to get the England job. Working with Wales would have been appealing because we had really good players, and he quite fancied a shot at international management. Yeah, like I said, like England weren't going to go there. He was refused permission. I mean, it dragged on for months and months and months as the thing. And then Yorath we had some games against, I'm going to say, Sweden, Malta and Italy in the summer of 88, I think. And Yorath was appointed whilst he was Swansea City manager to do those Wales games on a sort of game-by-game basis. And we lost to Sweden, I think, but then we beat Malta and then we beat Italy in Brescia, and Ian Rush scored after the end of his unhappy season at Juventus.
Mettere calma, mentre Van den Hove effettua la rimessa. Lancio molto lungo, palla pericolosamente in area, la gira in gol Rush, Galles in vantaggio, gol di Rush. Rush è riuscito a indovinare una girata praticamente.
This is like a full-strength Italy team with like Mancini, Donadoni, Vialli, Maldini, Ancelotti played that game. Yeah, it's an insanely good Italy team. And we had like so many players out missing. Kevin Ratcliffe was out, Southall was out. So, like, we had this real scratch defence, and I can't remember who played in goal or in defence, but like Ian Rush and Mark Hughes up front sort of caused some problems, and Rush scored the goal. And after beating Italy in Italy, you can't sort of not give someone
it's a great Italy team.
In a way.
Zenga, Bergami, Maldini, Baresi, Riccardo Ferri, Ancelotti, I know Donadoni, Fernando De Napoli, Mancini, Giannini, Vialli, Altobelli comes on at
So
half time.
Mancini and Vialli up front, who were playing together
Yeah.
for Sampdoria, of course. Yeah.
We had Tony Norman in goal,
Tony Norman in goal, yes. Gareth Hall.
Clayton Blackmore, Geraint Williams.
Clayton Blackmore was a Man United reserve in this. He was a reserve
Yeah.
team player. He wasn't playing first team football. This was
Pat Van Den Houw,
Right.
Neil Slatter,
Yes.
the late Alan Davis, Barry Horn, and then Ian Rush, Mark Hughes. Oh, Mark Hazelwood. I don't know why he's listed at like number 11, but he'd have been centre back. I mean, to be fair, we gave him a chance. We left Dean Saunders on the bench. We sent him on 75 minutes. But we gave him a chance. But
that got him the job, basically. That
fair play.
Job, basically, yeah.
I mean, that's not even second string, you know.
Apart from up front, yeah.
Yeah, Rushy and Hughes, yeah, for sure. But I mean, you know, and there's names there. You go, oh, Barry Horn, yeah, that was his 5th cap. You know, Hazelwood, his 10th cap. Saunders only his 9th cap off the bench. He was at Oxford. There's 2 Oxford players in that team at the final whistle. Whereas I'm just looking through the clubs for that Italian team. Inter, Milan, Inter, Milan, Juventus, Milan, Napoli, Sampdoria, Roma, Sampdoria, Inter. Jeez. Yeah, that gets in the job, isn't it, I guess? You're not...
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, I mean, it was... Yeah, the Forest Board refused Clough permission to talk to Wales and sort of offered Clough a new improved contract. So that was that with as far as Clough was concerned. But yeah, so Yorath got a job, but he was Swansea City manager at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, we have I know we've covered a lot of this as well. I just think in terms of, tribute for him, bearing in mind tragedy sadly is part of his story. The way it ends, not just in terms of the match, but the death of John Hill at that Romania game. But he gave us, belief. He gave the players belief. There's a great quote from Craig Bellamy to this effect. The impact Terry Yorath had on Welsh football is immeasurable. Watching the 1994 World Cup qualifying campaign with him as manager was the first time I experienced genuine belief that our country could qualify for a major tournament. As a country, we have so much to thank Terry for what he did. Now, if you're a bit older than us, you're going to remember the Mike England era, maybe even the Mike Smith era. And we were going close for tournaments. But I guess for our generation, where it kind of dipped a little bit for a couple of years, towards the end of England's era, the first couple of years, it takes a while to grow into the role as manager. But that campaign, he does give the nation this belief. And for me, that is the era when we properly have a national team that the media really seems interested in, not just one or two journalists whose job it is to cover, Welsh football, and it's a footnote in the big British national papers and stuff like that, And I might be investing too much of my own kind of perspectives on these things, but I just think that was it. It was the Andy Williams song, "You're Too Good to Be True." It's the golf swing kind of celebration thing with Dean Saunders. It's playing with that just amazing kind of Umbro kit with the watermark, when watermark became part of the thing, with the dragon on there. It's playing at the old National Stadium, the Arms Park. All of those things kind of culminate, and they don't resonate if you aren't doing well on the pitch. And he's kind of there, but there's that steeliness even to him as well. You just got a sense, and there was a bit of backbone to that team as well. I mean, you think about how well. I mean, obviously one of the biggest disappointments of that campaign is that Mark Hughes is suspended for that final game because he's playing in midfield and he picks up a bit of a silly booking. But it was almost like the game wasn't going all our way against Cyprus, and it's like we need to dig deep here, and there was a steeliness to that side. As much as they could play, and Giggs obviously then comes in and was just an absolute breath of fresh air when he first came in. For me, like I said, and I think Ellis is the same with his quote. It is just. It's just indelible, and Yorath is just intrinsic to this thing, this conception of a Welsh national team for me. Even if he wasn't involved with it in any direct sense for 25 years or whatever it was, 30 years, that is just how close an intrinsic connection he is with it all, and everything that's come since in the last kind of 35 years of my life.
Oh God, yeah, yeah, absolutely, well put. I mean, that first campaign. It was to try and qualify for the 1990 World Cup, And
Oh, yeah. You talk about tough groups in the 70s.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, like, it's absurd. But like, we were in with the Dutch, who were European champions, and West Germany, who would go on to win the fucking competition. So basically, between like we had to kind of split, the two best teams in Europe to actually qualify for the World Cup, and then Finland were in the group as well, and we didn't do very well against Finland either. But I mean, this is not very talked about. We were incredibly close to preventing West Germany from qualifying. I don't know the exact circumstances, but I mean, we went away there and it was 1-1 into the kind of final stages. I think Marco Mellon scored, and they needed to win to actually qualify, because I mean, it wasn't for sure that like that two teams qualified out of every group. It was like this, only so many of the second best teams qualified. So I mean, we could have prevented West Germany, as was, actually getting to that World Cup that they won if we'd sort of held out a little bit longer. The circumstances around that are quite mad. And we only went down to a 1-0 defeat in Amsterdam and a 2-1 defeat in Wrexham against the Dutch, who were the great Dutch team of Hullet, Rijkaard, Koeman, Van Basten, that team. So, I mean, we were competing at least. And we drew 0-0 against West Germany in Cardiff. And that was the first game held at the Arms Park in the modern era, at least. I mean, I discovered this, that doing some research, that we did play at the Arms Park in the early 1900s. But in the modern era, the WRU finally relented and let Wales play football matches, which is something the FAW have been pushing for a while at the Arms Park. And the first one was against West Germany, and we played really, really well that game. Looking at the highlights, we should have perhaps won against West Germany in 1988. It might have been early 89 anyway. But yeah, we were never going to qualify from that group. And then the next group was to get to the European Championships, and again we have West Germany drawn, but by the time we're playing them, it's the unified Germany, so they've got the really good East German players in there as well, like Hassler, and Belgium, who'd been at the World Cup and been really good and got to the knockout stage of the World Cup, so that was ridiculously tough as well. And again, only one team qualified, so it just shows you how hard it was to get to tournaments in those days, and then so we were just missed out to Germany, which is a real shame with that defeat in Nuremberg, which we all remember. I mean, lack of strength and depth really cost us, and Yorath was having to play Portsmouth reserve midfielder Gavin Maguire at right back because he didn't have anyone else. There's the difficult things that he had to deal with as manager. And then that next campaign obviously is probably the most iconic one in attempting to qualify for the World Cup in the USA in '94, and so many great games, and particularly beating Belgium at home. Giggs first start, scored a free kick, and we had a poor start to the campaign that really sort of turned things around somewhat, and we were kind of a sort of positive run, winning games and drawing games, and we were looking forward to that Romania match with so much expectation, and everything sort of was quite tragic in the end, but it was heady times.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, broke my heart, still does. And it dealt with fairly shoddily by the FAW. I think that is a fair and common consensus. And obviously Toshak kind of takes that game, and it's that one game at Ninian Park, and I didn't think he'd realised quite how strong the antipathy towards the FAW and how it had dealt with Yorath had been. I mean, he cites that himself. He was genuinely surprised and taken back by it, and I do wonder whether it was, whether he'd have stuck around if it maybe was another person who'd preceded him, and the circumstances. I always wonder whether, again, which was kind of like in my thinking when I asked the question earlier about how did what was the relationship like between these two. almost to a certain extent does the honourable thing and kind of sort of says, well, I'm not going to carry on under these circumstances. This is not the sort of job I want. I'm sure there's a little bit of self-preservation in there as well. But I think it was always a shame that it ended the way it did with him after that spell in 93, because he finds his way to Cardiff, which on paper looks like a perfect match. You know, he never played for Cardiff, but he finally kind of comes home, as it were. Obviously, you know, he's been at the Swans. He had a couple of spells with Swansea. It's not a huge success at Cardiff. Cardiff is struggling a little bit. And he goes off to Lebanon, and you think, well, for someone who's had all this kind of, you know, tragedy and everything else in his life, and he goes to sort of, you know, war-torn or post-Civil War Lebanon.
Yeah. Well, there's some in Gabby Logan's book, which is really interesting. And I'm writing about Wales managers at the moment, and with Yorath, a lot of information out there. Especially, you know, he wrote a book, and he has a famous daughter who's written a book as well, and she talks in her book about going out there to visit him in her university days, I think it was, and being surrounded by these buildings with bullet holes in them, and sort of, and she describes him as being as sort of broken as his surroundings. I can't remember the exact quote, but they made a fine pair, him and Beirut. I mean, this is just in the aftermath of his son's death in 92, and he'd always been a heavy drinker, but I just think, you know, this is the point where alcoholism takes over, really, and you know, it's something Gabby Logan has been upfront and honest about, so I don't feel like I'm sort of betraying any the memory of the guy. But you know, we're talking about someone who was an alcoholic, who had some serious demons. You know, second half of his life, particularly. You know, just I find it extraordinary that he made it to 75 actually, to have lived with a broken heart for that long. His marriage disintegrated in the early 2000s, I think. You know, he was on his own after that, and wasn't good at asking for help. Wasn't good at accepting help, even if it was sort of, you know, given to him. Like, you know, like after a stay in rehab, he went to stay with his daughter and family, you know, with Kenny Logan and Gabby, his daughter, of course. You know, they were just trying to help him move on with his life, but he just didn't kind of know how to. Really.
If there's something that kind of comes out of that particular part of the story, you know, that if people are struggling, and if it's grief, if it's, you know, a bereavement, if it's other forms of mental illness, you get a sense that, you know, he did keep things bottled up, and that perhaps isn't the best way to do it. But it's easier saying that than doing anything about it. I fully appreciate, and you know, it is good to talk, as they say. So, like I said at the start, you know, I hope he's found his peace that seemed to have evaded him last years. But there were lots and lots of warm tributes. I thought some of the stuff that Leeds put out as a club, I thought was really, really good. You know, very, very poignant, very respectful. Clearly, you know, a big, huge regard for him. What was interesting, because he also was involved with Sheffield Wednesday, he was involved with Bradford. He was almost like an adopted Yorkshireman as well. I got a sense from some of the tributes. There were things from, like, you know, people, you know, it's like how you get this in football fandom, isn't it? Oh yeah, well, even though I'm a Sheffield United fan, I take my hat off to Ennillodd Yorath, you know, kind of, you know, an adopted one of our own was one comment I saw, you know, and was always quite happy to speak to people as well around the streets of Yorkshire, and people would sort of bump into him, and, you know, he was respected. One of those people that kind of goes beyond some of the rivalries that exist, even if he you know, he didn't have a connection with your particular club, as in, you know, Sheffield United, for argument's sake, and, you know, he played for one of your biggest, if not your biggest, rivals as well. So that is a measure of him as well, you know. I'm conscious of time, Leon. It's getting late here. It'd be late for you. I mean, would you anything else? Any obvious things we've missed here?
In researching Ennillodd Yorath, his son Jordan, whose earliest memory as a 6-year-old is of his brother's death. I mean, it was just absolutely shocking. But like, so he's quite a bit younger than Gabby and Louise, and it was 9 years younger than Daniel as well. Terry is quite honest in his book, saying, you know, it was a hard childhood for Jordan because he was left as a sort of only child, really, because his older sisters had moved out, and his brother died, and his parents' marriage was disintegrating. So, Jordan Yorath is an estate agent. I think you'd say a property developer. I think, but he's been on. Just looking for kind of any snippets. I've listened to a couple of podcasts he's done in regard to property, which is not an interest of mine. But anyway, some little interesting things came out of that, and one of which was that at 70 years old, his dad went to Tony Adams' Sporting Chance Clinic. And he talked about how proud he was of his dad that at that age that he would go, the sort of bravery he showed to go and sort of go into rehab. And I just thought, wow, yeah, that's really quite something, actually, for a guy in his 70s. You know, it's that stubborn streak again, I think, you know, it's sort of coming back to that. That he made it to 75 is a hell of an achievement, considering the shit that he went through in his life. And it's, you know, testament to just what a tough bastard he was. And, you know, too young to have seen him play, but I feel privileged to have watched those Wales teams that he managed. And those are fond memories that will last a lifetime for me.
Yeah, so yes, cos Cymru'n heddwch, rest in peace Terry, much missed, and one of the giants.
Here's Yorath. Evans waiting up in the box. Hughes, let it go! James is behind him. And a penalty has been given. Look at it again. Hughes let it go. James got behind him. And no doubt about it that Chilton, carrying through, brought down James. So Leighton James with a chance to put the Welsh in front. And that's his 7th goal for his country. Clean as a whistle in the corner. Welsh flags in evidence.
In for Brazil, Careca, star of the last World Cup. We join it in the second half. Commentary from Graham Lloyd.
Good. Nice little chip in. Speed. Chance for Saunders. There it is. Dean Saunders. Goal number 10 for Wales. And the result of a lovely move. He might not be scoring too frequently for Liverpool.
Yeah, it's a good move because Pembridge gets forward and he's positive and he gets a good cross into the back post. And I think it's Gary Speed that jumps with the keeper and the defender, and that leaves an open goal for Dean Saunders, and he sticks the ball in the back of the net well.
Group 5 had been disrupted before a ball had been kicked, with the withdrawal of East Germany pending unification. Belgium lost the first match in Wales. They benefited from a gift goal in return. Mark de Greiser, number 9, shared his delight not only with his teammates, but also the fans in the stadium. Wales, having won at home to Belgium and away to Luxembourg, wasted little time in hitting back. Wales believed Belgium had a weakness at the back, and they exploited it. A long cross from the left, Ian Rush is on the back post, and Dean Saunders adds the thundering finish.
Lorimer. Clark. Leeds having to go sideways and backwards to find a bit of space. But a lovely flick by Yorath. Very well done. Yorath still going. Bremner will take it over. Now Clark on to Yorath. It's there, Yorath! 3! Yorath started it inside his own half and Yorath finished it. Terry Yorath's 3rd goal of the season. He started it way back 20 yards inside his own half. It went through half a dozen passes and it was Yorath who slipped into the penalty area to put it past Chilton for number 3.